Hello everyone, today we will be reviewing the Snapmaker Artisan 3D printer, CNC machine and laser cutter. Everything is here. Snapmaker is actually one of the quieter brands in the market. We don't hear its name very often and we don't see it in advertisements. But whenever we talk about modular systems, printers, laser cutters, or CNC machines, Snapmaker is one of the first brands that comes up even with a quick search. Why? Because Snapmaker designs its printers to also function as a laser cutter and a CNC machine. Their frames are sturdy with no visible belts or gears on the outside. They manufacture devices that use industrial-grade rails. We can say that the Artisan is the top-tier printer in this system. What you see here is the premium package of the Artisan. The only difference between this and the standard version is the laser. While the standard version uses a 10-watt diode laser, the premium package comes with a 40-watt laser. The remaining features are the same. Both packages include a dual-nozzle extruder system and a 200-watt CNC head. The printer has a fairly large working area of 40 centimeters by 40 centimeters. I call it a working area because just as we can change the printer's heads, we can also modify this build plate in the same way. While the printer is working, we use PI coating glass plate for the laser, metal grid plate for the laser, and MDF board for the CNC. Since the printing head has dual nozzles, you can print in two colors. I tried this, but the goal of dual nozzles is to use different support materials rather than just getting colorful printing. Because you can't provide much variety in color, however, it can be used for specific purposes. In my first attempts, I painted Benchy in a simple way. The color transitions were clean. There was only a small mistake in one spot. Yes, the dual nozzle is great and there is no waste material. But since the nozzle can clean its tip at one point, the filament flowing from the other nozzle can stick to the model during color changes. You can see this in other models as well. This is a functional and nice box. It is designed for a GoPro action camera. I made the box black while choosing white for the text part, but the issue I just mentioned is more apparent here. The melting white filament in the other nozzle stuck to the black surface during the color change. This doesn't happen with every color change. For example, the 13 blades in the jet engine didn't have this issue. Yes, it is possible to printing in dual colors. There is less waste filament, but I think without a designated area for nozzle cleaning, such problems may occur. Snapmaker also places importance on the use of support materials. There are easily removable breakaway filaments for support and water-soluble PVA filaments. I tested the breakaway filament on this model. It's a model where printing without support is not possible or at least very difficult. I printed the same printing in two ways, once using only PLA for all supports and once using breakaway. I only used the breakaway filament at the contact point with the model. There are two reasons for this. First, the material is expensive. Second, there is no need to use it beyond the contact points. I can say that this support filament has a better result than I expected. Since there is no gap between the main models, a very smooth surface has been created. The sagging at right angles is also minimal, almost negligible. In fact, when we place the models side by side and look at them, you can easily see how big the difference is. Supports are easy removable, which is also an advantage. Another important support filament is the PVA I mentioned earlier. Of course, 3D printers have some limits. Sometimes when we want to printing, we may need very complex support structures. In fact, there are cases where the supports are extremely difficult to remove and sometimes even become impossible to detach. At this point, to be able to printing from our printer, we either simplify the model or first break it down into parts and then we assemble it later. However, even with this method, we may not always achieve the desired results. There may also be models that must be printed as a single piece and should not be divided into parts. For example, this model has interlocking parts. If you absolutely need to print this as a single piece, you will have to use a lot of support material. After that, removing these supports under normal conditions is quite difficult. However, if you created a support using a material like PVA, you can then place the model in water and wait. Once the supports dissolve, you can use the model as you wish. This is not a successful printing. This model experienced the most issues among the ones I mentioned earlier. During the filament change, the filament remaining at the tip of the other nozzle always stuck to the main model. One reason for this is that PVA is a very fluid material. This has caused surface irregularities in many areas. However, this problem did not occur in the other models. A gear system was printed as a single piece. Under normal circumstances, if I had used PLA support materials to do this, removing the supports would have been quite difficult. However, I had no difficulty at all with the PVA material. This was my first time using this filament. First, I took the printing and threw them into the container where I filled it with water, considered a time-lapse to show you nicely. But a few hours passed, there still wasn't a noticeable amount of material dissolving. There are two reasons for this. First, I printed the PVA at 100% infill. Its density should have been lower. The second reason is that it was in still water. PVA does not dissolve quickly. For that reason, I used the washing device from my resin printer. Since the device continuously agitates the material while washing, it sped up the dissolution process. Keep this in mind. When using such a support material, if you wash it with water at 40-50 degrees and use a washing device like this, you will significantly speed up the process. The PVA material will completely dissolve in water within approximately 4 or 5 hours. Apart from these, I have done many printing using various materials. Among them are a stand for holding watches, a lighting fixture, a flower pot, a bust that can be used for hobbies, a jet engine, and even an airplane. The watch stand, lighting fixture, and the bust of the Witch King from the Lord of the Rings series were printed using PLA material. The printing is successful. Especially when we look closely at the bust, there are no noticeable printing defects. The surface quality is very good. There's just a little bit of stringing at the top of the crown. Other than that, I can't point out any flaws. I used Pietagy for the blue part of the pot model. The legs were printed with wood-infused PLA filament. Similarly, this radio-controlled airplane model was also printed with PLA. This is the Cubba 800 radio-controlled model airplane from Crichel Hobby. The printing turned out great, but what was even better was seeing this plane in flight. In my previous videos, you can watch the construction process and flight performance of this plane. It was quite an enjoyable video. I'm also leaving a tag above for that video. For the jet engine prototype, I used ABS and ASA filaments. As is well known, open frame printers are not very suitable for using ABS and ASA filaments. The Snapmaker Artisan has a large enclosure. With this, we can enclose the surroundings and printing ABS or ASA filaments under better conditions. However, of course, having a large enclosure is a disadvantage. Another disadvantage is related to the heating system of the print bed. In fact, Snapmaker has used a very nice system to save electricity. If the models you're printing are small, you can heat only the central part of the print bed to printing. You don't need to heat the entire printing, and this central section can reach up to 110 degrees Celsius. However, when you want to printing larger models, the remaining part of the bed can only reach a maximum of 80 degrees Celsius. This makes it not very suitable for materials like ABS and ASA, which require a bed temperature of 90 to 110 degrees Celsius. Since the print I made was large enough to fit on the middle table, I was able to get ASA and ABS prints by applying glue to the table. However, if you want to print larger sizes of ASA or ABS after getting this device, it might be challenging for you. Keep in mind, we've reached the power of the Snapmaker Artisan's laser module, a powerful 40-watt diode laser. With this laser, you can cut materials like MDF, wood, plywood, leather, or plexiglass, or you can mark these materials and engrave various patterns on them. With this laser, you can achieve highly detailed engravings or cuts. For example, in the world map I created, even the smallest country names are readable. Or if we need to give an example of cutting, this decorative tea light candle holder I made from 3mm MDF has very small and fine details. A thickness of 3mm is very easy for a 40-watt laser. It is possible to cut even thicker materials than this. For example, here you can also see the cuts of 6mm MDF and 5mm plywood. Both the sharp points on the MDF and the cuts and patterns on the plywood have come out very cleanly. Speaking of MDF, you can cut up to 8, 10, even 12 millimeters thick materials. I had a 18 millimeters MDF, but it couldn't cut through it. If you want to work with an MDF that's 18 millimeters thick, you'll need a more powerful laser. I've also tried cutting wood. I had a 2 centimeters thick pine wood. It couldn't always cut through the material in one pass. When it hits a knot or a joint, it can leave some residue in those areas. However, with multiple passes, it's possible to cut through 2 centimeters thick wood. Of course, pine is not an easy material to work with. It contains its own resin, and when this combines with the laser, it can catch fire. Fortunately, safety measures have not been overlooked in the Artisan. If a material catches fire during operation, the device can detect it. It immediately cuts the power and alerts you with a loud sound. I also worked on plexiglass and leather. Especially those who make wallets, bags, or leather accessories may prefer to use laser devices for cutting. What you see here are two pieces I cut for wallet production. Roughly cutting the general outline is already easy. What matters here are the fine points used for stitching. As you can see, these small rounded areas have also been cut very cleanly. You can use plexiglass with this laser. Cutting a few millimeters thick black plexiglass is quite easy. It is also possible to work on different dark-colored plexiglass materials. However, it does not have a direct effect on mirrored, transparent, or white materials. Although it is not included in the package, Snapmaker also offers an optional 2-watt infrared laser. This laser offers us some advantages that a diode laser cannot provide. Thanks to this 2-watt laser, we can even process painted metals, steel, silver, gold, copper, or aluminum. Of course, we can create patterns or do marking on these materials. Additionally, we can also work on materials like plexiglass, PLA, ABS, and PTG. The wavelength of light differs between a 40-watt diode laser and a 2-watt infrared laser. Therefore, some materials react differently to light at this wavelength. For example, on this steel material you see here, the dark-colored marking was made with a 40-watt laser, while the light-colored one was done with a 2-watt infrared laser. As you can see, the 40-watt laser produced a much darker result. However, the colors are not very homogeneous. Some spots are dark, while others remain light. Apart from that, there is also slight distortion in the text and patterns. The infrared laser, however, was able to engrave this much more sharply. I also conducted a test on aluminum. The 40-watt diode laser had no effect on the aluminum. The infrared laser, on the other hand, although very faint, it was able to leave a mark on the aluminum. In my opinion, the biggest difference of the infrared laser is seen on plastic materials. Because when working on a black material, it can create very sharp text and very sharp patterns without burning the material at all. However, you cannot achieve this with the 40-watt laser. Even if you lower the power of the laser, the material melts when trying to mark plastic surfaces, and it slowly starts to lose its shape. So in fact, the two types of lasers have different areas of application. If you are focusing on cutting materials, then the 40-watt laser makes more sense. However, if you plan to engrave various materials, create patterns on them, and especially work with plastic, then the 2-watt laser would be a better choice. And we've arrived at the CNC feature of the Snapmaker Artisan. With this 200-watt CNC, you can cut materials such as wood, MDF plywood, carbon fiber sheets, circuit boards, and plexiglass, or create engravings and reliefs on them. You can even work on metals such as copper, brass, and aluminum by using the appropriate bits. I tried cutting a 1 centimeter thick MDF. It was able to cut these pieces, which consisted of simple shapes quite easily. I haven't actually used a CNC before, but I really think that 200 watts of this power could indeed be quite enough for many projects. However, I can say that it produces a very loud noise during operation, so a CNC is not really an ideal option for home or office use. Of course, if you or your neighbors have no issues with noise, you can use it. Aside from the noise, there is also a lot of dust. Even after just a few minutes of cutting MDF, a significant amount of dust accumulates. So considering all these factors, I can say that using a CNC is more suited for a workshop environment. However, the printer and laser functions can be used almost anywhere. Just make room for a device of this size. I think Snapmaker Artisan could be a good option for those who work on their own projects, engineers, or people who need CNC 3D printers and laser devices for commercial production. Yes, that's all I have to say about my printer. I hope this video has been helpful for you and that I was able to give you an idea. If you are considering getting an Artisan, you can find the product link in the description below. May your printer run smoothly and your printing be flawless. See you in the next video. Goodbye.